Welcome back to Jeff Willett's Muscle Hub, home of my weekly Q&A show and all of my YouTube videos. Got some more great topics this week, so let's get started. Question number 1. What's a good procedure for changing up your exercises when starting a new Max OT cycle? Well, as you may or may not know, after every 8 to 10 weeks of Max OT training, it's recommended to take a complete week off for total mental and physical recovery. When you come back from that week off, it's a good time if you want to change up your routine a little bit. Now, I have to mention that change isn't absolutely necessary, and I think from a physiological standpoint, I don't believe it's necessary, but sometimes from a mental standpoint, to have a mental freshness, sometimes people do like to change their routines. And again, after the week off, it's a prime time to do it. As long as you're adhering to the main Max OT principles such as exercise selection, set and rep volume, and so on, you can arrange it any number of ways, and I have different examples on my website. But a couple key things to keep in mind is I would not group major body parts together. For example, I would never group chest with back. I would not group legs with any other major body part other than, maybe you could do legs with calves, but for the most part I like to train them alone. Only because if you group two major body parts together, the second one in sequence is going to suffer from your lack of energy and focus because you've expended so much on the first major body part. So again, I would avoid that. Other than that, if you keep the principles, the main Max OT principles together, there's a number of ways you can arrange them as far as days per week and the groupings. But just again, to reiterate, I don't think you necessarily have to change the order, but again, there can be some mental benefits if you do decide to change. Number 2, why don't you add fruit to your diets? If you've looked at any of my material, you often see my nutritional plans really don't contain a lot of the fruit. And it's a question I get sometimes because people say, well, eating fruit's healthy. Well, it is, but you got to remember, eating healthy and eating to build muscle aren't necessarily the same thing. You can have a very healthy diet that isn't necessarily going to maximize or encourage muscle building. Now, that's not to say that a good muscle building diet is unhealthy. It's just the two don't necessarily overlap. With fruit, you got to understand that fruit has a caloric value, and most of it, or many fruit items, are high on the glycemic index, which means you can have them in your nutritional plan, but you just have to group them accordingly. You have to have them either in that first meal of the day or in that pre and post workout bubble when you want your high glycemic carbohydrates. But fruit is not something that you would want to have during the day or other parts of non-training hours as a snack because of the fact that it's going to fluctuate your blood sugar levels. So that's why I stick with green crunchy vegetables in the non-training hours and eat those rather than fruits. And for my pre and post workout carbohydrates, I didn't choose fruit, but that doesn't mean you couldn't. So again, the take-home message there is, remember, fruit has a glycemic rating, most of it's high, so if you are going to have it in your nutrition plan, keep it in that pre and post workout bubble, and it could be with your first meal of the day as well. Question 3, what are some suggestions for a shoulder workout, because I would love to have more variety in the training? I think variety is honestly overrated. What we want is to achieve muscle overload in all of our workouts. So you never want to select a different or less effective exercise just for the sake of doing something different. So for shoulders, our primary movers is always going to be the overhead press. And for that, I think the two best options are either a seated military barbell press or a standing military barbell press. Now, dumbbell presses are good too, but I think the drawback to dumbbell movements, especially when you get with really heavy weight, is the diminishing returns as far as all the energy that you have to get the dumbbells in and out of place and overhead. I think is kind of wasted energy. I'd rather use a barbell where all that energy and emphasis can be focused on the muscle building sets. So I guess to answer the question is, I really wouldn't look to add a lot of variety. I would stick with the basic movers, and I would start that shoulder workout with an overhead press, 3 to 4 sets. And then I would do maybe 2 sets of a side lateral raise and 2 sets of a rear lateral raise. But stick with the basics because overload is more important than variety. Number 4, how slow or fast should you be lifting for the best results? I don't put a lot of emphasis on rep speed or rep cadence. Sometimes they'll say it should be so many seconds on the negative and on the positive. I think trying to accentuate the rep and spending that energy, I think it's energy misspent and focus misspent on like counting or trying to exaggerate the rep speed. Instead of that, I just focus on muscular control. So as long as you're under muscular control, especially on the negative portion of the movement, and you control that weight throughout the move with good biomechanics, what we would call a controlled cheat, you're going to be fine. So again, I wouldn't over accentuate the rep speed. So you don't want to go super slow motion, but you just want to be muscular control the whole rep. Number 5, what will be expected? What is someone expected to show in their first bodybuilding contest? That's a really good question, and I thought I would narrow it down to kind of one scope here. And a lot of times when someone's competing for the first time, there are several unknowns, but one of the biggest things is your body weight. You really don't have any idea of where you're going to come in at and be your best. And by being your best means having and maintaining as much muscle as possible while being as lean as possible. You got to be competitive lean, which just means you got to be shredded, right? So you don't necessarily know what that weight's going to be. So the first rule I would say for a first-time competitor is I would not go into a show thinking, well, I'm going to be a light heavyweight or I'm going to have to be a middleweight. You don't really know. So what I would do is I would just focus on getting in best shape as possible. You have that visual image of the physique you want to achieve. Focus on getting lean and do not worry about body weight. The only time I would worry about weight or even look at it is if maybe a few weeks before the contest, and if you're a couple pounds or very close to the next weight class cutoff, then maybe it makes sense to make sure you get into that weight class cutoff, but that's not something I would worry about through the preparation, because if you worry too much about weight, most times you're going to take your foot off the gas because you think you're dropping too much weight, when really it's not about weight, it's about building and maintaining muscle while getting as lean as possible. And the current video that we're working on with Josh, where we're taking him through the whole process as a first-time competitor himself, this is going to be a really cool, valuable tool that's going to illustrate exactly what I'm talking about right here. So that wraps up our questions today, but I wanted to remind you that we are working on getting our Q&A seminar finished up, and that will be available as a download in my online store. So stay tuned for the release date of that, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Now let's go out and execute.